Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, we're joined by Drew Price, the man behind Masterclass Angling. Drew shares his passion for chasing exotic species on the fly on his home waters of Lake Champlain. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend and subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And we recently launched a new podcast called The Butcher Shop, where the meat meets the water. Each episode focuses on a single pattern from a predator fly angler tire. We take a deep dive into the genesis of the pattern, its design, and how to fish it like the inventor. We recently dropped our interview with Blaine Chocolate, taking a deep dive into the T-bone, and our interviews with Tommy Lynch and Russ Madden are dropping soon. To make sure you don't miss a single episode, be sure to subscribe in the podcatcher of your choice. We will only be distributing episodes on the Articulate Fly for a limited time. And finally, a shout out to our sponsor, Trout Routes. We all know streams and rivers are getting crowded, and chances are you're not the only one at your local access point. Get away from the crowds and busy gravel lots by using Trout Routes Pro with over 350,000 access points mapped across 50,000 trout streams and much more. Trout Routes has all the data you need to help you find angling opportunities that others will overlook. Up your game and download the app today. Use code ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, for 20% off of your Trout Routes Pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Now, on to our interview. Well, Drew, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And we have a tradition on the Articulate Fly. We like to ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Well, I can go back to, I believe I was 7 years old fishing with my grandfather. We were on a little tiny trout stream in Constable, New York, and he was walking behind me, and I had the rod over my shoulder, and I stopped, and he didn't. And next thing I know is the worm hook is hooked into his shirt pocket, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, you just caught yourself a 175-pound sucker." That's my earliest fishing memory. We didn't catch many trout. I've subsequently gone and fished that stream a fair amount, and it's a fun little stream. Mostly stock browns, but it was a great memory of my grandfather.
Very, very neat. And so when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
When I was in college at SUNY Plattsburgh, I picked up fly fishing in, I guess it was 1993, the first time I graduated from college there. I graduated with an art degree, and I asked my parents for a fly rod. Graduated in December, and I went out and beat the snow quite a bit with it and taught myself how to cast. And within a month of having that, I bought a fly tying kit, and the two kind of went hand in hand. And that next spring, very first fish I got on the fly was a nice smallmouth bass out of the Saranac River, probably about 4.5 pounds, and definitely developed a love of smallmouth at that moment.
Very, very neat. And so obviously you've been in the game for a long time. Who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey, and what have they taught you?
Well, it's interesting. So initially, I really, I had a couple of buddies in college that I fly fish with a little bit, but most of my early fly fishing experience was entirely on my own. There weren't a lot of people that I knew that really fly fished seriously, and were interested in doing the kind of fly fishing that I wanted to do. I've always had kind of like what can I catch next attitude. So I would get out and chase whatever I could find. When I first started fly fishing, I really wanted to get into pike, catch pike on a fly. I wanted to get muskie on a fly, all these warm water species that in the early 90s, nobody was really talking about, and nobody was really chasing. But that was what I wanted to do. My first muskie on the fly was 95, right? And there was nobody talking about muskies. There was nobody in my area in northern New York doing it. So I didn't really have any mentors, and in a lot of ways I was kind of self-taught. That has changed in the past 10 years or so, where I've really kind of come into the industry more. And the people I really look up to and I'll hit up for advice are Tom Rosenbauer and Blaine Chocolate are two people that who I have a lot of respect for, and are willing to answer questions for me and talk me through things when I need help. And that's been really, I couldn't ask for two better people to reach out to, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the amazing thing too is, not only back in kind of the mid 90s, there was no information for chasing these, we'll just call them kind of alternative species on the fly.
Right.
But I
Yep.
mean, the gear wasn't there either. Right. I mean, and so,
No.
this isn't like you just go to like the catalog or the internet and you get a muskie line, you get a muskie rod, you get a muskie reel, you go buy muskie flies, and you go buy, terminal tackle, and you're done. I mean, it was like you had to kind of build it all.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, no doubt. My initial musky flies were basically just a kind of a deceiver derivative that I kind of made up myself. You know, with a lot of bucktail and rabbit strip, and I was using the old Mustad 3366 hooks, and whatever hooks I could find. Um, the wire I had picked up some single strand wire down in Florida on a fishing trip to the Everglades. I found it at this fishing shop, and I bought like a couple of packages, like 30-foot rolls, and that was my pike and muskie leader. For pike, when I was pike fishing, I was just using a conventional tackle leader, which really aren't great with when you're fishing on a fly, fishing with a fly rod. And back then there were none of these awesome lines that are out now that are like 2 line weights heavier to really help you propel those big flies. So and the rods weren't quite right. Back when I really got into it, it was IM6 was like the hot thing. I remember building a couple of my own rods because I worked for a hook and hackle company. They were based in Plattsburgh for quite a while, and I worked for them for a while, and built my an IM6 9 weight, and that was my go-to muskie rod for several years, muskie and pike rod for several years. I just remember what a bear that was. Like it was so much more pleasant to do the stuff that I do with gear that is intended to do what I do, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when did you get the guide bug?
So I'd been fly fishing for about 15 years. I had moved from northern New York to Vermont. And I'd thought about guiding here and there, but I was always kind of like, I don't know if I really have the chops for it. I don't know if I really have the know-how. And, is this something I really want to do? And then I happened to see a local guide service that was looking for people. They're looking to bring people on board. I think it was an ad on Craigslist of all places. And I was like, what the heck? I'll do that. And I came on board, and it was mostly guiding trout. And I was like, hey guys, I do all this stuff with like bowfin and carp and gar and pike, and they're like, you do what? And I was just like, this, I've got all these things that I do. Is this something you think people would be interested in trying out. And they're like, sure. And within a couple of years, about a third of the trips that we were running were the trips that I brought to them. And I quickly realized that, didn't really want to do 101 trout trips anymore. And I really wanted to focus in on the kind of stuff I was more interested in. And I went out on my own, started masterclass angling.
Yeah, got it. And so when was that?
That was in fall of 2010.
Got it. And, so you mentioned Tom and Blaine in terms of fly fishing mentors. I would imagine they've been incredibly influential in your guiding, but are there any other folks in the guide space that have kind of mentored you on your journey?
I've got some friends around here that have been pretty helpful. There's Jesse Haller, who works for Orbis now, was really great. We talk shops. There's definitely a group of guys around here that I talk to pretty routinely now. But a lot of the stuff that I do isn't, it's very non-traditional, especially for Vermont. Like when I started bringing Bowfin to the table around here, when I brought it up to the guide service that I was originally with, I was like, there's these fish called bowfin in Lake Champlain, and they all looked at me and they're like, what's a bowfin? So I didn't really, I kind of, not trying to put myself up on a pedestal. I just know the stuff that I like, that I know the stuff that I want to do, and I know how to do it. And I'm kind of a natural educator. I worked in the education field for 10 years, and I love teaching people new things. And I love teaching people about the lake that we're on and the fish that are here and how to catch them. And it just kind of came together for me. I don't know that if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, it does, and it's an interesting thing because I've been fortunate enough to know and fish with a lot of guides, and it's kind of, and you and I have talked about this. I mean, it's kind of that secret sauce, right? Where,
Right.
like guide nirvana is to fill your calendar with people that you want to fish with, that want to fish the way you want to guide people.
Right. Right. Well, actually, I actually have to take this back a little bit because I just remembered probably one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got about guiding was in 2012, and it was in August of 2012, and earlier that year I had filmed with River Monsters. They came to Vermont to film an episode, which is Vampires of the Deep. They were chasing after lamprey, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had recommended me because they wanted to try to put Jeremy Wade on some muskies, and they're like, the guy you got to talk to is Drew Price. And, and I talked to them and I was like, muskies may not be a great option, but bowfin and gar and there's a few other things. And I'd be happy to help you out with this. So I was like, I know all these waters that you're on, and ended up spending 5 days with them. You barely even see me in the episode. It's kind of funny. They're filming in the back end of the canoe. Jeremy's in the front of the canoe. I'm in the middle, and the top third of the screen is my butt. So you really don't see me much in the episode. But Jeremy came back to Vermont later that summer, and he reached out to me and he said, let's go fishing. And I took him out, and at the end of the day, when I was driving him back off to the hotel, we're just sitting in my truck in the parking lot talking, and he was telling me about when he guided in the Amazon, and he said, "You know what I did?" He said, "I did what I wanted to do. I didn't let other people create the expectations of what they wanted my guide service to be. He's like, I wanted my guide service to be this. He's like, I went out and I fished for the things that I wanted to fish for, and people came to me because of the interest that I had in those things. And he said, he's like, I was booked out 2 years in advance. He's like, there was a waiting list. And he's like, do what you want to do with your guide service. And that's really the first 10 years of my guide service. That's what I did. And it's kind of still my attitude about it. Like I could do trout trips. I don't, for the most part. I'll do some streamer trips for larger trout here and there, or sight fishing for large browns in the fall. But for the most part, I avoid that. I have been very fortunate that most of the people who come to me want to do the things that I do because they see the excitement that I have for what it is that I do. And whether it's, learning how to catch a bowfin or gar on a fly, or learning new techniques on, like how to locate lake trout, and target lake trout with a fly rod, or going out and just like, how many different species can we get in a day on fly? And I think a lot of people really appreciate that. And I've actually found that I get a lot of guides who come to me who want to do something different, right? Like, we've all chased trout. And that's one thing that is like, fly fishing is really a trout culture, for the most part. But people are starting to see, wow, there's all these other options out there. I mean, it's not really starting to see, but you're starting to see it become more mainstream these days, I think. And you're seeing people like, wow, this is really exciting. I can go out on the lake and I have an opportunity to catch this ancient predator, but then I can also use like a 3-way rod and catch these trophy, beautiful panfish. I got a shot at catching a channel catfish that I'm sight fishing for, or along those gar, and I'm catching it with a fly that I'm not using a hook. It's and people are like, this is pretty amazing. I see a lot of anglers get really excited about that these days, and people are coming to me for that, and that excites me. I think you can hear it in my voice. Like that, I find this stuff really fun. And not knowing exactly what the day is going to bring when I get out in some of the backwaters that I fish. Like dropping this rod and grabbing another one because something just suddenly showed up. Like working panfish, and all of a sudden there's a 30-inch bowfin that comes right up to inspect the boat. I love that stuff, and I'm finding more and more anglers are loving that kind of opportunity.
Very, very neat. And so, you guide, Lake Champlain, and for folks, I mean, I'm a Southerner, so not super familiar.
Yep.
So can you kind of give us kind of a little bit of an overview of the area and the fishery?
Sure, absolutely. So Lake Champlain is it's bordered by Vermont on the east side and New York on the west side, and the Adirondacks on the New York side, and the Green Mountains on the Vermont side. And it goes north into Canada, into Quebec, and 10% of the lake is in Missisquoi Bay, which is in Canada. That's a place I've never fished in the Canadian waters of Lake Champlain. But the lake itself is 120 miles long, and it goes from from Canada down past Whitehall, New York, both places of the U.S. Navy. It is 12 miles wide at its widest point near Burlington. It's about 400 feet deep. At its mean level, which is about 96 feet above sea level, It's got about 7.5 trillion gallons of water. But I really like to think of Lake Champlain as a very dynamic system, because it's a a big catch basin, right? For it's got a very large watershed, and after the spring melt, Lake Champlain typically will get to 99 to 100 feet above sea level, sometimes higher. We had the highest lake level in 2011 of 103.3 feet, so tremendous amount of water there. And unlike, Lake Champlain is not like a bathtub, so it doesn't just come straight up. When it comes out, it spreads out, and it spreads out into these large wetlands. We have these massive wetland complexes in both New York and Vermont. Vermont has a lot more than New York, and so you get these incredible opportunities to fish flooded forests in the springtime, and where you have carp and bowfin and pike. It like literally in the trees. It's pretty neat to be able to push pole through the trees and find your target species. But in this late summer, getting to September, even to October, the lake level can drop down as low as 94 or even 93 feet. So you could have a 7-foot lake level fluctuation throughout the year. And if we have like a big water event, like when we had Hurricane Irene, or we had the big flood event 2 years ago, the lake level came up 2 feet in 2 days, and which is just a massive volume of water. So it's a really dynamic system that can change a lot, and every time, every year is new on the lake. So when you get on that lake, you'll have a general idea where the fish are, but you really have to kind of relearn it every year, which I find that very exciting. I find that really interesting. You kind of got a different playing field every time you get out there. You don't know exactly where you have an idea where everything's going to be and how it's going to play out, but you don't know exactly. And in one place it fishes very well one year, may not fish very well the next year. So that's kind of a neat part of it. But we have 88 different species in the lake. Of that, about 25 or 30 are really available for fly anglers to catch. We've got a lot of different panfish. We've got some of the best bass fishing in the country. Lake Champlain is rated for the past 30 years has been rated by Bassmasters as one of the top 5 bass lakes in the country, primarily because of smallmouth bass. The smallmouth fishery here is just absolutely insane. And I love chasing them in the lake. But what I find even more fun is chasing them in the tributaries in the springtime when they come in to spawn, because you go out with a 5 or a 6 weight, and you've got you're basically fishing like you'd be fishing for trout, but you're getting 2 to 5 pound smallmouth instead, which doesn't suck. We've got a lot of trout, or we've got a lot of lake trout. Our lake trout fishery is fantastic. They're available in the early season, and in the late season. I kind of call them my shoulder season fish. I'll start catching those in March, and using floating lines and intermediate lines, and they're available until the water starts warming up to about 45 degrees, and they start sinking down a little bit, and you can still get them on sinking lines down to about 50 feet. And then they'll show back up again starting usually in October. November, and December can be fantastic months for chasing Lakers on a fly. We've got some great salmon runs on the lake. We've got landlocked Atlantic salmon. We do have some steelhead runs. We've got pike, pickerel, and muskie. We have hybrids of pike and pickerel which some people around here will call pickerel. Really, really attractive fish. We've got walleye. We've got bowfin. I've got one client who's got almost every IGFA tippet class record bowfin, and most of them have been caught on Lake Champlain. So we have a lot of bowfin. We've got long-nosed gar. We've got a great population of carp. We get these great sucker runs. I love catching suckers on a fly. I actually hold the Vermont state record for white sucker caught on a fly, which is a massive white sucker, like 6.3 pounds or something like that. Really big fish. Let me see, what else do we have? And we got just, there's so many different opportunities when you go out there. And we've got freshwater drum. I love fishing them. A lot of people around here call them sheep's head. That's one of the hardest fighting fish on the lake. They're really challenging to sight fish for, but you can also cast streamers for them. We get some big ones up to around 20 pounds, and that will just, that will bend your E-weight right down to the cork when you're fighting one of those things. It's pretty awesome fishery. I feel really fortunate to be here. And I feel really fortunate to be, like one of the first people who's really, promoting Lake Champlain fly fishing.
Very, very neat. And you'd mentioned earlier that you basically had to relearn the lake every year. And, most of my guide guests are, creek and river guides. And so, is that the main difference, fishing in a lake, or are there other things that make the lake game different?
Well, there's so many things that make it different. You got to deal with boat traffic. You really have to know how to play the weather. Like if I'm fishing in a towee on this lake, and this is a big lake. It's a very large lake. If I am not paying close attention to the weather, I could be in deep trouble. You really have to know what bays are safe with the direction of the wind. You got to be really paying attention to that wind forecast, the weather forecast, and then just paying attention when you're on the water, because things can go wrong very, very quickly. Especially when the water is cold. When the water is below 60 degrees, that's a dangerous place. This is, and I take safety very seriously on the lake. It's a lake where things can change very dramatically, very quickly. I can remember one day I was out with my my bowfin client, Richard Hart, one of my bowfin clients, and he's the guy who's got all the IGFA records. And Rich and I were this is back when I was guiding out of a canoe, and Rich and I were out in this backwater, and we had a light chop on the water. It was maybe a 3 or 4 inch chop. And I just saw this dark cloud coming across the lake. And I was like, Rich, I'm really concerned about that. And it started getting in closer, and the wind started picking up. And it went from a 3 to 4 inch chop to a 3 to 4 inch crashing waves. And we had a mile and a half to paddle back to the launch. And that was one of the most frightening moments I've ever had on that lake. But it went from 0 to 60 in under 5 minutes, so you really have to keep your witch value on the lake. You kind of have to watch out for other boaters. You got to watch out for other anglers. We have a lot of bass tournaments on this lake. Sometimes they don't always respect the other anglers who are not targeting bass. I've had them blow in front of me a few times. But it's a really different environment. And, there are times you can go into a place where you have, like carp are notorious for this. I can go into a bay where I normally will find a lot of carp, and the day before there was carp everywhere. I go in there the next day, you can't find a fish. You can't, like, I have no idea where they went. Like they just disappeared overnight. Um, they may have gone into deeper water. Something may have happened. Um, that big question mark, and one I have never figured out. um, but it's a really, it can be a very variable system, and you're also dealing with, especially when you're dealing with cooler water fish, or cold water fish like the lake trout or pike. Um, as that water warms up in the lake, those fish start moving deeper, and they start using different habitats than they were using earlier in the season, and they will move back to those habitats. So you kind of have to know, that progression of where they're going to head to and when they're going to head there. And that's not something that you can, learn overnight. You really have to spend a lot of time, watching and observing what's going on. And on a lake this size, like I consider myself a student of the lake, because every time I get on that lake, I learn something new. I learn something different that I hadn't learned before. It might be a new location. It might be a new way to fish, different parts of the lake, or for different species. Are like, wow, I never realized these species were utilizing this habitat this time of the year. So you really kind of, when you're out there, being very observant really pays off. And being willing to talk to a lot of other people and seeing what they're having for experiences. I talk to a lot of conventional anglers. I have a lot of friends who are conventional anglers, and they'll tell me a lot of stuff. They may not be going after the species that I'm going after, but they'll see them. And they'll be like, "Oh yeah, that bay over there is loaded with carp." Okay, great. Or I've seen a lot of bowfin in X, Y, or Z, and I'll go check it out. And that can be really helpful. But the different parts of the lake are dramatically different too. Like the broad lake that I'm near here, I'm in Charlotte, Vermont, and this is a section of the lake we call the Broad Lake. The Broad Lake is big and deep. You get down to the southern end of the lake, in Orwell and the Whitehall area. Down there, it's kind of like more like a big muddy river. So it's an incredibly different environment. Yeah, it's radically different than streams and rivers.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And so, you've got this incredibly, diverse lake with all these different species. Tell me a little bit about how you map that to various angling experiences at Masterclass Angling.
Well, a lot of it is depending on, what somebody wants to do, or the time of the year. I get people who reach out to me and they'll be like, "Hey, are you guiding right now?" And if the lake is open and I can get my boat out there, generally the answer is yes, as long as the weather is conducive to get out there. And lake trout are a great option in the early season. But sometimes people will come to me and they'll be like, "I really want to catch a bowfin, or I really want to catch a gar." And I'm like, "Great, let's do it." And get out and teach them the techniques that they need to be able to catch those. But, a lot of it is, I try to base it on, not only the time of the year, but, what people want to experience. And I'll be pretty upfront with people, like, here's what's going on right now. Or, you want to catch pike? We're right in the middle. It's August. This is not the time to be chasing pike. If you really want to come to see me and get into some pike, your best bet is to hit me up in late April or May into June. And then again in like October, November, even into December. That's when we have good chances at pike and some trophy fish. some trophy pike during that time period. I kind of, I use the available resources for when they are coming to see me, or I let them know, like, hey, you want to get bowfin, May through September is your best bet. So hit me up during that time period.
Yeah. It's neat too, right? Because I mean, from looking at your website and doing research for the interview, I mean, you've got, do you want to wade? Do you want to sight fish? Do you want to fish from the boat? It sounds like you kind of offer it all.
I really do. I offer muskie trips in muskie rivers in northern New York. I do walk and wade smallmouth trips. Like I said, I will do some trout trips here and there. I know some great trophy trout streams in Vermont, and in northern New York. I've got some. I spent a lot of time in northern New York. That's where I grew up. I offer landlocked salmon trips on Lake Champlain tributaries and Lake Memphremagog tributaries, Clyde River. There's steelhead opportunities on both sides of the lake. And that's all walk and wade. So there's, I love having diversity like that at my fingertips, and I've had people who, I've got some clients lined up in April that want to do one day of walk and wade trout fishing, and then they want to head out in the lake and see what they can get. I'm stoked for that. I love those challenges. I love keeping things variable and really, exploring the diversity of fishing opportunities that we have in Vermont and in northern New York.
Yeah, it's neat too, right? Because I know you're particularly proud of your bowfin fishery, and I was kind of curious.
Yeah,
obviously you're fishing for all kinds of, we'll just call them fly fishing exotics. But
right.
but what attracted you to start chasing bowfin on the fly?
Just to be blunt, they are the biggest badasses out there. They're really incredible fish. There is no other fish that I've encountered that will swim up to you and look you in the eyes. They're very aggressive. They're very intelligent. They're a native species. They're basically unchanged for the past 300 million years. They're not the same species in the fossil record, but if you look at a fossil record when T-Rex was roaming the earth, a fossil bowfin from when T-Rex was roaming the earth, you could tell that it's a bowfin, and it looks almost exactly like the bowfin we got around here right now. It's pretty amazing. I mean, the males in the springtime have incredible colors. Their fins get turquoise. They get an emerald green color on their sides. Their bellies kind of get this pumpkin yellow orange. And their eye spot, they've got this orange eye spot that's almost glowing. It's so orange, and they get incredibly territorial and aggressive when they're defending their babies. I had one. I was in this backwater. I was in a flooded forest, and we found this little male. It was 22 inches. I know because we ended up catching this thing, but it saw the nose of the boat come in, and it literally jumped out of the water and bit the bow of this boat. And, here's a 22-inch fish going after a 15-foot boat to defend its babies. That is just really cool. Watching how they stalk their prey, how they'll come in, the dorsal fin, it undulates. And you can really tell a lot about how that fish is behaving and what it's thinking by what that dorsal fin is doing, and the way they do the smash and grab when they're in close, because bowfin fishing is almost all sight fishing. It's not particularly difficult fly fishing. It's really dapping, or jigging, with a fly rod. But you're hunting fish. I'm on the polling platform. I have my client in the front, and you're looking for these fish. And if the fish, bites the fly and gets off, it's not gone. I've had them. I see this all the time. They'll grab the fly, they'll feel the hook, they'll shoot off, they'll turn around, and they'll come in from a different angle to find out what that was, and you get a second shot at them. I mean, that's really cool. I mean, my very first Bowfin guiding experience, I was in my canoe. We were going through this backwater and these lily pads, and I hit a Bowfin. Thump, thump. And the thing shot off, and I watched it, and it turned around and came back and looked at the canoe to see what hit it. My client got a fly in front of it. It grabbed it. He's got it on, and it circles around some lily stems, gets off. He gets the fly out of the lily stems. The fish comes back, and he hooks it a second time, and it gets off a second time. Like, what other fish does anything like that? They're really cool, and they're very long lived, and like I said, they're really smart. I will splash the water and get them to come in because they're so curious. And a lot of people around here think that, oh, you're splashing the water and the bowfin come in. They're really dumb. It's the opposite. They hear that splashing, they think something is wounded, and they want to come in to see if they have an opportunity to eat something. That curiosity is intelligence. So these are an incredibly intelligent fish, and more than willing to take a fly. But if you really keep hitting the same area again and again and again with the same flies and the same techniques, they pick up on it. They know what's going on. So you have to vary what you're doing, which to me keeps things more exciting. I've gone on record saying this before. I consider bowfin the most American game fish out there because they are so unchanged for so long. They're incredible. And if you've never fished for bowfin, you really need to, because it's a very, very cool fish to target.
Yeah, that's very neat. And so tell me a little bit about kind of like your rod reel line setup, and then sounds like you got to kind of change the fly situation up because they kind of get dialed in, right?
They do. I've used a lot of different rods. 7 and 8 weight tends to be the sweet spot. I like to use a stiffer rod. I think, at this point, the rod, my go-to rod right now is the 8.57 weight Helios. It's a short, stiff rod, and it really gets the job done very well. You can cross that fish's eyes with the hook set. Line really isn't that important. Any floating line will do. The leader is very short. I usually just do a short, like maybe a foot of or so of like 20-pound fluorocarbon, and then I will tie off 16-pound to that, and about a 3-foot piece of that. So you only have a 4-foot leader. You really don't need a very long leader. A long leader is actually detrimental to good presentation when you're doing the style of fishing that I do for these guys, because you only have a couple of inches of fly line out from your rod tip. Like I said, you're really dapping, and to properly present that fly and to be able to get a good hook set, you actually have to have the rod pretty much perpendicular to the water, parallel to the water. You want to have that rod parallel to the water, because you're going to set the hook kind of keeping the rod flat and parallel to the water. So you kind of got this upward stroke. You don't want to set back with your wrist. when you set back with your wrist, it's a lot like trying to set a hook into a concrete block. And I've had 3 rods that have broken right in front of the grip because of just, the way you're setting the hook like that. As far as flies, I have kind of a number of my own patterns that I use for them. They're for the most part fairly heavily weighted. They're kind of really buggerish flies. I've got one I call the Mr. Beauregard, and I got another one I call Mr. Bow Squiggles. I've also had very good luck with crayfish patterns. Changer craws are fantastic. Certain times of the year when they get really, when the bowfin get really finicky in midsummer, I find that the changer craws can be more difficult to get a hook set with. At that point, you really want to have a good. You want to get you have your better opportunities with the changer craws earlier in the season when they're really a lot more aggressive with their takes. But they will take carp flies. They'll take almost anything, to be very honest with you. But if you've got the wrong hook, it gives the fish an advantage. When you're fishing for bowfin, a short shank heavy wire hook is much more effective in getting a hook set than a longer shank hook. And if you have a longer shank hook and you're playing those fish, that hook acts more as a lever, and their mouth is just almost all bone and teeth. And if you have any kind of lever like that, and the way these guys fight, they thrash around a lot. A longer shank hook will work itself out a lot easier than the short shank hooks. So it's a lot of fun. I try to keep the fight pretty short and sweet. Using a really stout leader. When somebody hooks into one of these things, I come flying down from the pulling platform and grab a net and scoop them up as fast as I can. Because if they get into the weeds, they will break you off. I carry a lot of bowfin flies because there are a lot of breakoffs.
Yeah, so it's not exactly the no changer left behind mentality.
No. I mean, it sucks to lose a changer to these guys, but that's kind of part of the process, right? It does happen from time to time. One thing that I will say, and I've heard people, say that when you're fishing bowfin, you got to use a wire leader, and nothing is further from the truth. Yes, they do have a mouthful of teeth, and you do not want to get your fingers in there. They will shred you. However, their teeth are conical teeth, similar to like what a walleye has. They're not cutting teeth like a pike or a snakehead. So you don't necessarily have to have wire. You don't need wire. And actually, I think wire doesn't allow you to give as good a presentation as you will with just fluorocarbon. So wire is not necessary for their type of teeth.
Got it. And so Drew, what's a day like? Either waiting or on the boat with you.
Well, it really depends on what time of the year it is. With lake trout in the fall, it could start at 3 a.m. Going out and chasing them for dawn hours using glow in the dark flies in my boat. It's I'm really trying to help people dial in their cast and presentation to the fish that we are fishing for. I also like to make sure that I like to educate people about where they're at. Lake Champlain not only is it an amazing place for fishing, but it's an incredible place for U.S. history. When I launch at Otter Creek, we go right by the very spot where basically the War of 1812 was won. And most, we got tens of thousands of people who go by that every summer and have no idea that, a 1 hour gun battle right there is what changed the course of the war. So that's pretty cool to be able to share that with people, and also explain, the natural history of the fish that we're going after, or other animals that we see. Um, it's a really neat place, and I love sharing my home with other people. I also like to have like plenty of good snacks. I work for a small business that has some amazing sweets. They, Anytime anybody is going out with me, I have these maple pecan bars, which everybody seems to just think is the cat's meow, and they're really good. They're incredibly addictive. Which can be detrimental to my waistline at times. But it's it's sharing this the incredible resource that's right here between New York and Vermont. This lake is I love sharing this lake with people. Because it's such a great place.
Very, very neat. And rumor has it that you might have a book in the works.
I do. I will have a book coming out from Stackpole in September called Favorite Flies for Vermont, where you will see some of the offerings that I have, but it's also kind of going to go through some historic flies, but also flies from folks like Tom Rosenbauer and a lot of other guides and anglers throughout the state. Mostly trout flies, but there's a lot of other good stuff in there, and you'll see some of my bowfin flies and gar flies, and it'll be pretty neat to see my first book being published.
Yeah, we'll have to bring you back. It's as we talked about before we started recording, you can't do justice to the guide experience, and then the whole trauma of writing a book deserves its own entire interview.
You got that right.
Yeah, so
you got that right.
Yeah, so I know the bucket that you fall into, because there are kind of two flavors of ice cream there. They're the people that love writing the books, and then there are people that are like, they did it once and almost killed them, and they never want to do it again.
Well, I would like the opportunity to do it again. I've got some other ideas floating around, but we'll see what happens with this first one.
Very, very neat. And so, before I let you go this evening, Drew, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Just come up and visit Vermont, and check out Lake Champlain. It's a really cool place, and you'll really enjoy yourself.
Yeah, and so so I'm down in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you're not kind of within a reasonable drive distance of your neck of the woods, kind of what's the best way to get up there?
There's an international airport in Burlington. That's really your best bet. It's about a 4.5, 5 hour drive from New York City. We're about 3.5 hours away from Boston, hour and a half from Montreal. So it's not really too far from a lot of stuff, but it's just far enough away to make it a little challenging to get here. But there's a lot of great accommodations. There's a lot of things for families to do here. Burlington's a wonderful city. We have a great food culture here. If you like beer, you've really, you can't go wrong with Vermont beer. It's a cool place, and fall foliage in Vermont can't be beat.
Yeah, and I've never found bad beer, so there you go. Right?
No, well, there you go. I mean, we got home at Hetty Topper, and there's a lot of other really good beers around too. So, we definitely pride ourselves on the microbrews here.
Yeah, and so if folks want to learn more about masterclass angling, book a trip with you, follow your adventures on the water, where should they go?
Masterclassangling.com is my landing page. But also I'm on Instagram at Masterclass Angling, all one word. Yeah, give me a follow and check out the adventures that I get into and that I get other people into.
Yeah, very, very cool. I will drop all that stuff in the show notes.
Fantastic.
Well, Drew, I really appreciate you spending some time with me this evening. And, maybe around the 4th of July, I'll reach out again and we'll get you on the calendar to do a full-blown interview on your new book.
Thanks a million, Marvin. I'm looking forward to getting you on the water sometime as well.
Absolutely. Take care. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget to check out the links to all of this episode's sponsors in the show notes. Tight lines, everybody.